Let's bring in Robert Malley, President and CEO at the International Crisis Group, former special envoy for Iran and lead negotiator on that 2015 Iran deal, also author of the forthcoming book, Tomorrow is Yesterday, Life, Death, and the Pursuit of Peace in Israel-Palestine. Welcome to you, Robert. So glad to talk with you. I'm curious, sir, your overall reaction to what's been going on. Where does this conflict between Iran and Israel stand today in your mind, both militarily and diplomatically?
Well, the first thing I'd say is never underestimate either Israeli or American capability when it comes to the military and the intelligence prowess, and we've seen that particularly from the Israeli side over the last week. But by the same token, never overestimate their capacity to think strategically, to think of a political exit ramp, and to think through the consequences of their actions. So we're in the midst of a war that clearly Israel has established dominance over. But where this goes, where this leads, and what the longer-term consequences are for Israel and the region, that's a very different matter.
Do you think that Israel, and I'll just use Israel on one monolithic entity, has a huge upper hand right now over Iran?
Militarily, there's no doubt, and including what you just reported, they're able to access and to kill the top brass of the Iranian IRGC and their military, and they're doing it because they have extraordinary intelligence. They've penetrated Iran. They almost certainly have assets on the ground. So yes, and they control the skies. Does that mean that they could achieve the political strategic victory that say they're pursuing? Again, that's a very different question. This is a long movie. We're only in the first scenes, and I think if we'd be mistaken to look at the first scenes and assume that that's how the rest is going to unfold.
In terms of intelligence, how close is Iran to making a nuclear weapon, and how much has Israel set Iran back with its targeted attacks?
So first, if I could take a step back, you mentioned I was part of the team that negotiated the JCPOA, the nuclear deal in 2015. Iran is closer than ever to achieving to getting a nuclear bomb. How close that is, I'll get to in a second. But the reason they're closer than ever is because President Trump decided in 2018, encouraged by Prime Minister Netanyahu, to tear up the deal that had constrained, restrained, and sort of put Iran's nuclear program in a box. We would be nowhere as close. Iran would be nowhere as close. Sure.
And I want to interrupt you on that. Why? What is the logic that you can decipher of ripping that up and essentially affording, what, now 7 more years for Iran to go relatively unmonitored and do what it wants to do relative to enriching uranium?
Because I think there was a theory of the case, and the U.S. has been guilty of it not once but several times in its history, of assuming that a country or a regime that's under pressure, under sanctions, with the threat of perhaps more robust military action, is going to fold, is going to surrender, and would have agreed to give up its nuclear program. That's not the way things work, and it is extraordinary to see today, again, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu scream about how close Iran is when it is their actions that brought them here, and now they want to take us, or they have taken us, at least Prime Minister Netanyahu, on a military adventure. So that answers part of the question. How close they are, listen, every intelligence service that has spoken about this has said, or the intelligence community has said, that Iran had not made a decision to seek to acquire a bomb, and that's as recently as Tulsi Gabbard said about a month ago. Now, does that mean that there's a debate in Iran? And certainly since over the last few months, last 2 years, the debate has intensified within the Iranian leadership, whether the time had come to cross that threshold. But nothing indicates that they had made that decision. Of course, today I assume they're even closer to making that decision than they ever were in the past.
So, hang on. You have Tulsi Gabbard saying that they weren't close to making a bomb. That was not the intent. You had Donald Trump saying she's flat out wrong. Who's right?
Right. Well, I mean, I think viewers could reach their own conclusion. I think when Tulsi Gabbard testified under oath, that was what the intelligence community had concluded. Again, they concluded that Iran had not made that decision. And I think, again, if you listen to the experts, Iran is at least 6 months, perhaps a year, or was before the Israeli strikes, a year away from being able to develop a nuclear weapon. President Trump said what he did. I don't think that that's backed up by intelligence. So I would go with what was said to the Senate under oath.
Can I ask, is there a point after which there's no turning back? That Iran gets, X amount close to the prospect of building a nuclear weapon. And even if it's a few weeks, a few months, that there would be no turning back. Does that exist?
Certainly there's a situation in which the options to stop Iran would be, if not nil, close to nil. We were not there. Again, first of all, there was a diplomatic track that President Trump and his special envoy were involved in, and which seemed to hold some promise, at least based on the reports we heard. And then there may have been other tools that could have been used. There was no urgency. The urgency was not a matter of Iran's nuclear intentions. The urgency was twofold from Prime Minister Netanyahu's point of view. One, he wanted to preempt American diplomacy. He didn't like the shape of what any potential agreements could have been. And second, and understandably, even if I criticize it, he saw a historic window of opportunity because Iran was weaker than it had been in a very long time. The Islamic Republic was weaker than it had been in a very long time. And so Israel had the opportunity to take out, or believed it had the opportunity to take out Iran's nuclear program. Those were the clocks that Prime Minister Netanyahu was looking at, not how close Iran was to getting a bomb.
Robert, you've sat face-to-face with the Iranians in a number of high-stakes discussions. Are good faith negotiations with Iran truly possible, or will Iran always want to pursue nuclear weapons?
I don't believe in good faith. I don't believe in trust. What I do believe in is agreements that are enforced, that are verified. And when it comes to the agreement that was signed in 2015, every report, including by the Trump administration in its first term, said Iran was complying with the deal and continued to comply at least some time after President Trump withdrew. So no, I don't trust them, and I think you need to put in place mechanisms to make sure that you know ahead of time if Iran is about to cheat. They had not cheated then, and if we get in a deal now, we'll have to make sure that we have transparency, absolute transparency, to know what Iran is doing ahead of time.
And what are the challenges to verifying that Iran is complying with any deal, be it that which you did and helped put together in 2015 or something that may come now?
Well, the challenges in some ways have gotten worse. I mean, they've gotten better because Iran's nuclear program is a shadow of what it once was. It's gotten worse because we just don't know what's happened the last few days, weeks. Has Iran tried to hide some of its nuclear material, and will it lie about that? What you need is the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that has inspectors on the ground, and you need them to be there as often as possible to have access to any place where they suspect activity is taking place. Don't forget again that you also have American and Israeli and other intelligence resources that, as Israel has proved, has really been able to penetrate Iran, and would therefore probably know again if Iran made a decision to weaponize before it was too late.
Robert, Trump demanded Iran's unconditional surrender in the latest negotiations, which didn't happen. If you could advise this administration, what strategies would you suggest? First, to get Iran back to the negotiating table, and then second, how would you approach these discussions?
Well, the one thing that one has to understand, and I don't think it's only true of Iran, but the regime is not going to surrender unconditionally. That's like assuming that the fear of death is going to lead them to commit suicide. They believe that if they were to give in completely to President Trump's demands, it would be sooner or later the end of the regime. So they would prefer taking their chances, fighting this out, even if at the cost of Israel or the United States bombing Fordo, their last remaining real nuclear site, and just hope to wait for a better day. So I think what needs to be put on the table is something more realistic, very demanding of Iran. And again, what Steve Witkoff, the envoy, President Trump's envoy, was discussing with his counterpart, the Iranian foreign minister, seemed to be something that had potential. It needed more time, and President Trump is often a man in a hurry, and a man in a hurry means a man who's often impatient, and I think his patience ran out earlier than it should have.